Hey Rebels, today's special guest is Ashely Karol with Thoughtful Thinkers Coaching, and we talk about all things neurodivergence, neurodivergence in the workplace, burnout, and burnout if you're neurodivergent, how to tell, and how to start getting out of it, as well as diving into a little bit of spiritual stuff. So this is a great episode if you are struggling with burnout or you think you might be neurodivergent, you're looking for how to succeed at work, or you are anywhere in that burnout space. So let's dive right in. Excited to chat with Ashely. Hey, Ashely, welcome. So glad you could come on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super excited to be here. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you've been enjoying it. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about you and about Thoughtful Thinkers and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a certified coach. I have done life coaching before, but I pretty much specialize in neurodiversity, especially in the tech industry. Like you, I have a really holistic approach to life coaching. I feel like my life coaching has really helped me with my career coaching and all that sort of stuff because it's all so interwoven. I've been coaching for about 4 years now. My business is fairly new. I've been coaching for a while, but my business is a little bit new. And I come from a background of engineering and music, and I have always had this draw to balance practicality with passion. It was always a difficult journey for me, but I've absolutely love coaching, and I feel like I've really discovered the thing that's good for me.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. So engineering and music, you said, right?
Yeah.
How did you find that balance? Because I think a lot of people and a lot of people that find me, they have this artistic streak or musical streak, something in the arts, but then they're, in this career that's totally different. So how have you found that balance or found a way to blend that for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of where the name came from, Thoughtful Thinkers. I was like, what's my strength? And the idea was that I am very thoughtful about things. I've been through different careers and I've thought about what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And then I do that with my clients, what works for them and not. So the balance is, I think what I have found is that you have to be really mindful about not getting caught up too much in the logic or the emotional part of it. You really have to find a balance in both areas. And the way you do that, in my opinion, is thoughtful reflection with a coach, with a journal, things like that. Because the way that I find people are the happiest is when they have enough of both to sustain them. You can't just be practical going after the money, or you can't just be all about the passion and be a starving artist, because it just, neither extreme works in real life the majority of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think people get caught up in this idea that, if I'm passionate about it, then I'm going to love doing it as a job. And I think that's just not true either. Has that been your experience?
Oh boy. So I know a lot of current musicians. I know a lot of former musicians, because what I have found is that people work best when they're in a lifestyle that suits them. I know people who were super, super, super passionate about music, but they couldn't, they just didn't resonate with the freelance lifestyle. Yeah. So, and especially my generation, we were all told, millennials were all told, follow your passion. And I think to a degree that's important, but I do like to refine it as follow fulfillment that works for your lifestyle, a more nuanced version of that. I will say as a statement, I don't think passion by itself is enough to sustain someone.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it really comes down to, what do you end up doing every day, right? What does your day-to-day life look like? Because, I think a lot of us have this idea of oh, I could do this as a business. And then they get into, what does that mean? Every day, what I have to do. And they're I don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. I really like to focus on lifestyle needs before, especially working with neurodivergent people. There tend to be greater or more specific lifestyle needs than with neurotypical people. And I really like to focus on that lifestyle aspect first. And then how can we put as much fulfillment into that as possible?
Yeah, and I'd love to dig into that more. So can you just talk a little bit more, maybe for people that don't know, like what does it mean when you say neurodivergent? And, what are some of the lifestyle needs or things to consider if you find that maybe you fall into that camp?
Absolutely. So neurodivergent is actually not a specifically defined word right now. It used to mean mental conditions where people have something intrinsic about their brain that's different from birth. It used to mostly mean ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and dyscalculia. And I think there might have been one more. It kind of is expanding now to most sort of like mental conditions that are like that first of all, we don't always have the research to know where something originates from. So like OCD wasn't on the original list, but a lot of people who have OCD consider themselves neurodivergent. I like to use it very inclusively. So if you're a person who feels like your brain just works differently than other people, even if you don't have a diagnosis, I think looking into neurodivergent resources is a great thing, because even if maybe you're not clinically ADHD or OCD, you can probably learn something from the techniques that those groups of people use to work better if you feel like you resonate with those symptoms. And actually, I would just love to like quickly touch on the difference between coaching and therapy, especially when working with a neurodivergent population. I feel like I mostly work to help people thrive regardless of what their symptoms are. And I work like more on their symptoms, and then therapy will kind of work with the more underneath part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, there's a whole lot you could go into on that, right? Like what is coaching versus therapy? But the best way I've heard it described as well, and maybe this might help some listeners, is like therapy tends to deal with things that happened in your past. And then coaching is about how do I move forward and how do I like build a life that I want?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's mostly true. I will say that, like, let's say you're going to therapy for OCD, they'll work on typically, and it's all very gray, they'll typically work on making your OCD less prevalent in your life. Whereas like I work with you to thrive as much as possible with whatever OCD symptoms you currently have, whether or not they get better. That's another like sort of nuanced version of it that I feel like may only apply specifically to sort of what I do, but I think that's an important distinction as well.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely a little bit, I think, of an overlap between, where coaching and therapy come together. And it really depends, like you said, on the practitioner, like the coach or the therapist, and what exactly you're working on. So, but I've actually found that people can find really good results doing both at the same time. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of my origin story was I was in therapy for years and years. And then I got to a point where I was like, this just isn't helping anymore. And then I started learning about coaching, and I realized they're two really complementing services. Because, like I said, one kind of works on it, like we both said, one kind of works on your goals and what you want to do to move forward, and making those moves with where you're at now. And then the other kind of works to like, how can you change and be a more healthy version of yourself? I think they're fantastic together. I think they're fantastic swapping off and sequence. I definitely am a huge fan of therapy. And I also think coaching is an amazing resource, and they work so well together.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. So if I'm someone that's working maybe a typical 9 to 5 job, how does neurodiversity play into the workplace, and what should people be thinking about or considering, in that kind of environment?
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about helping people in this space is because it is so prevalent in the workplace, and people feel so silenced to take care of their own needs in this way. So let's say you're in an open office floor plan. It's kind of distracting, right? Because you have people walking around, people talking. For someone who's neurotypical, that's an inconvenience, but they can still focus on their work. For someone with ADHD, OCD, anything else where they identify as like their brain works differently, it can be impossible to focus, like literally impossible to focus. And people can spend all day at their desk not doing anything just to have to go home and do all of their work there, which creates more hours that they're working, which reduces the quality of life, things like that. So it's like things that can be, smells are a big one for people on the autism spectrum, smells and textures and things like that. Perfume can something that is an inconvenience to a neurotypical person can derail someone with a neurodivergence, can derail their day. And a lot of people don't know that the internal discrepancy is that high because they don't know what's going on in someone else's brain. They just think, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't focus enough. So it really affects them. And I think it's so important to, again, like more on my end, like know what symptoms you resonate with and focus on the things that can help you manage those symptoms in the workplace.
Do you know, are there any kind of things you can ask for at work, any kind of allowances, for neurodivergence? Like if I was a neurodivergent person working in an office setting, how can I adjust some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you asked that. So, so first of all, accommodations at work are heavily dependent on the organization and mostly your manager. So there's always that sort of dance of like, what social capital do I have with my manager to ask for these things? Unless you do maybe have a diagnosis and then you are allowed by law to have those accommodations. So just some accommodations that people could think about whether they have a diagnosis or not is a standing desk for people who can't sit all day. And that's even due to things like back injuries. And this is a great list for anybody to know. Stand desk, a desk that is further away from office traffic, people walking around talking for better concentration, blocks of time where they're not required to have to answer email or be sort of on call. And you could even possibly get your own office. There are some cases where people have gotten companies to pay for noise canceling headphones. There's software you can get, like there are certain softwares you can get that will like remind you certain things are happening and it could be different from the software you're using. It's all heavily dependent. And actually, if you look at the list, I think it's Ask Jan and Ask Earn are both great resources for people with neurodivergence and like accommodations in the workplace. So it's Ask, ASKJAN. Jan is the Job Accommodation Network.
Okay.
So that's a great one to know. And then Ask Earn. Yes, I was right. AskEarn.org is the other one. Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion. So this one is more geared toward employers, but it's also good for employees to like kind of see it from that other side. Both have great resources. Really kind of one good reason to possibly work with a coach, whether paid or otherwise, is to like find out what accommodations may help you and your specific neurodivergence. Because even two people with OCD are completely different. They can have completely different symptoms. They have completely different issues in the workspace. So that's something you really want to work with someone one-on-one for, to figure out what of those would be most beneficial for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like those are some great resources, for anyone that is looking for any kind of accommodation at work. And I'm curious, do you think that there are some jobs that are maybe better suited or less well suited for someone who considers themselves neurodivergent?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not what most people expect, where it's like, what jobs and what industries. What I have found is that it's really more about the organization and the manager that makes or breaks a job for neurodivergent people. Some organizations have, there's ADHD at work programs, there's neurodiversity at work programs, things where people have specifically set out to try and make, especially the interview process, because that can be really difficult for someone who's neurodivergent. easier for people to work and be productive regardless of what sort of accommodations they need. I really do, a lot of people used to put people who had neurodivergences, I think mostly autism and ADHD, sort of into this like tech role, because there was this thought that you would like be at a computer all day and you wouldn't have to interact with people. And that's really not true. First of all, in engineering, there's a lot of human to human interaction in engineering. And it depends on your brain. It depends on the people around you. So it's more about trying to find that right fit for you than saying like, these jobs are great for this type of neurodivergence, or this industry is great for this type.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to make that differentiation. Like you said, it's more about the environment and less about the specific job. Back in the 90s when I started in tech, way back when, yeah, it was just like, oh, put the weird guy in the corner with the computer. But especially as some of these different industries have evolved, specifically technology, and we're seeing a lot more diversity, I don't think that's a great solution anymore. So I love that there's some resources out there. Is there anything else you would tell someone that's really like struggling in the workplace right now, and maybe they're dealing with some burnout? Like, what would you tell them to start with? Like, where could they start to address this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the biggest first step is, and this is also something similar that's like kind of from your podcast, the big first step is space. When someone is really burnt out, really struggling, they need space to heal and take care of themselves before they can think of next steps. I've had lots of clients come to me truly saying like, I don't even know what to think anymore. I can't figure out what to do next. I'm so burnt out. I'm so stressed out. And the truth is that you really do need to be a part of the process. And the only way that's possible is to take care of yourself as much as possible, take out the stressors in your life, take out the sort of stimulants in your life, like lots of TV in the afternoon, things like that, lots of extra computer time, scrolling on your phone that isn't really serving you, things that will really replenish your brain so that you can figure out those next steps.
If you're enjoying the 9 to 5 Rebel podcast, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It would mean so much to me. And if you're not listening with friends, I highly encourage you to share this with a biz bestie, listen together, and then help each other win. Yeah, I definitely agree. That's step one of my program is like make space, like, take the breaks. So I appreciate you sharing that. But do you think that burnout looks different sometimes for neurodivergent people, or do you think it's kind of looks the same for everybody? I'm just curious your perspective here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can look very different for neurodivergent people. I think for neurotypical people, one of the common misconceptions I hear is like, I'm not burnt out, I'm just tired. But burnout often looks extremely low energy. People think burnout looks like this like high anxiety, stress, like jittery panic mode all the time. And that's just high levels of stress. Burnout typically looks like you're detaching yourself from the situation. I will say that certain types of neurodivergence can sustain that like extra high stress level for longer, even while being burnt out. And I think it's sometimes harder for them to recognize that threshold into burnout because they're more able to go into those modes of like hyper focus and still be like, well, I still am engaging and I still really care about this certain thing. That the transition tends to be a little bit messier is what I see. And it can look a little higher energy.
Yeah, so if I was a neurodivergent person and I'm thinking like, wow, I feel like maybe I'm burnt out, but I'm not sure. What are some things to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the oldies but the goodies is that all your friends are saying you're complaining about your job a lot. That I think that's a great indication of what your mindset is saying. If you've noticed a difference in your performance, if you've noticed a difference in so like I said, you can have like more hyper focus periods sometimes than neurotypical people. But if if you notice that those are fewer and far between, maybe, or if they're less hyper focused than they were before, like if before you like could totally get into flow like 2 times a day, even 1 time a day, and now it's like maybe once a week, that is a good indication. Um, and then some sort of just general signs of burnout, like you want to sleep all the time, you never feel like you have enough rest, you're really resentful towards your workplace. That is then also, that's an oldie but a goodie, universal one where you're just really, you don't really trust anyone in your workplace. That's a good indication of burnout as well.
Yeah, I think those are great. And just to add on a couple, that I think could apply to anyone. If one thing that I found for myself specifically when I was going through it was the only place I wanted to go, if I could like imagine my perfect vacation, all I wanted to do was sleep. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, well, where could you go? You have a week off. Where do you want to go? And I was like, my bed. It's exactly where I want to go for a week and not talk to anyone. So I think, if you can't even imagine that you want to do anything fun, it means you're like really deep in it. If you're like really unexpectedly emotional, I think some people can get where they're like, I don't know why, I just want to cry on a Tuesday because I dropped my pen.
Right.
And it's because like you're so at capacity, like you're over your capacity that's the final straw. That's like the final thing that's like, I just can't deal with anything.
Yes. Yeah. And also, this is a tricky one because I think neurodivergent people typically have a harder time with some neurodivergent people typically have a harder time with this to begin with. But if you find it almost impossible to take feedback, that can also be a really good sign of burnout because you just don't like, you're already so angry at this job. You're so unhappy. And you're like, how dare you tell me that I'm not doing this to the highest of my ability? And that can be difficult for some neurodivergent people to begin with. But if you notice a change in level of that, or like you said, emotional response to that too, that can be a good sign.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And then the other one I see a lot in my work is trying to regulate with uppers and downers, right? So it's like chugging the energy drinks, the coffee in the morning, just trying to like get up. And then at the end of the day, maybe it's smoking weed, maybe it's a glass of wine, maybe it's something else, maybe it's eating, right? Just that I got to bring myself down. And you're like artificially regulating because you're so far out. Like you're so far out of whack and you're waking up with panic attacks in the middle of the night, or you wake up thinking about work. And you're kind of going through that cycle. I think that's a really great indicator for folks too.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And like I said before, if you're using a lot of like numbing stimulus, like you just can't do anything but watch TV for 3 hours, that can also be kind of like used as an upper or a downer, depending on what you're doing. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good list. Like, I think if someone's pretty deep in burnout, they'll have some of that. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you that's like, this is a good indicator for people?
I think that's a really comprehensive list. I find more people know they're burnt out and they're afraid to admit it because of the implications of it. They don't want to have to deal with the repercussions of realizing that this job isn't working for them. They don't want to have to find another job. They don't want to have to deal with the time implications of finding another job, or even sometimes admitting the industry isn't right for them. So that would be like, if you suspect at all you're in burnout too, like even just sort of like giving yourself a safe space to really explore that option. Sometimes what you need is to like really confront it.
Yeah, and what I see a lot, two things. One is that people, they're like, yeah, it's burnout, but like everyone's burnt out and they think it's just normal. But you keep going through this cycle, and like the more you go through the cycle where you're like, okay, I kind of fixed it. Like I took a week off, whatever. I kind of fixed it. And then you go deeper the next time, right? And you just keep getting lower and lower, and you're eventually going to hit that rock bottom. And I think people don't realize, like, once you hit that rock bottom, like you're not going to be able to do your life, and that's when it gets really scary.
Yes. And, I feel really strongly about burnout is fairly normal. Unfortunately, and especially in my society in America, but I know all over the world in different countries, burnout is really prevalent. It is very common. But is it healthy? No. And I think one of my like core beliefs and beliefs in this business is that everyone deserves to be fulfilled and financially comfortable in their work. That is the only sustainable way to have a happy life. Your fulfillment and your comfort is a part of a sustainable, practical, healthy life.
Yeah. And I would say as well, for people that are like, well, I don't want to leave my career. I think for a lot of people, it's not necessarily the job that is causing the burnout. Like sometimes it is, sometimes it's a manager, sometimes it's the workload, but a lot of times it's something internal. And if you can solve that internal piece, like I think people don't always necessarily have to completely switch to a different job or a different career and leave forever. So I'm curious your take on that as well.
I want to know more about that. What do you mean by something internal, like a mindset block?
Yeah. So for a lot of the people that I work with, it's not so much that they can't do the work. It's like the internal mental loops. It's the stressing and the worrying. It's the not setting boundaries. It's the not fueling your body and your mind appropriately, right? It's like all of this stuff that you put yourself out here every day. It's like if you put a car on a highway and you never fill it with gas and you never change the washer fluid and you never pump up the tires, like, yeah, eventually it's going to be really run down, and you can like keep it going a little bit, but you've got to do that maintenance. And like, we're the same, right? Like we have to take care of all of these parts of our lives, kind of going back to what you said with the lifestyle, right? Like you have to have a lifestyle that's sustainable. And I think in America, we have this like burnout culture where we're like, just push harder, run faster, do more always, and you will be successful. And it's just not a sustainable way to live. And so I think for some people, if you can fix some of that, you can keep doing your career, but you're going to be doing it differently, right? You're not running at 120% every day for years because that is how you get to burnout, right? For some people. So
Yeah, absolutely. That I would say the biggest one is that work is my identity, that whole sort of myth. And that if I don't succeed at work, I'm not a good person. I think those are the two big internal things that people really get stuck in that create bad habits around their current space that make them feel like there's no way out. They're totally stuck. So yes, I totally agree with that. And I think it can be a hard, I honestly, I really applaud everyone who stays at a job that has become toxic for them, not necessarily a toxic job, but has become toxic for them and works through that internal stuff, that internal misalignment to get back to a place of joy and fulfillment, because that is a very hard thing to do because you've created so much baggage in this one space. So I really always admire people who are able to do that and do that well. But like you said, you're right. It is sometimes that is what it is.
yeah, and and I feel like it's so unique to the person. It's like, what is the root cause of your burnout? It's like, I have to talk to you. I can't just tell you the root cause of your burnout is this without knowing more about your lifestyle, right? Without knowing more about your job, without knowing more about your symptoms, right? Like, and that's where, I feel like burnout coaching is so unique because like some types of coaching, I think you can say like, oh, okay, here's what we need to fix. Like, or like health coaching, right? It's like, well, there's diet and there's movement. Like there's a couple things, right? And it's got to be one of them. But I think with burnout coaching, it's so unique to each person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unique to each person, not just because they're in different jobs or have different brains, but because they're in different spaces, like in their lives with all of those conditions. Yeah, I totally agree.
Any other thoughts on burnout for neurodivergent people?
I would definitely say take it seriously because, like we both said, it can lead to a really bad place. And financial security is super important, but it's not more important than your health and well-being. And burnout is a bigger issue than I think most people even talk about it as. People say, oh, I'm burnt out, it's not a big deal. But it really does have very real physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, energetic, whatever you believe in, repercussions for you if you are in that space too long.
Yeah. And I think the thing that people don't realize is that to really fully recover, it's not a month. It's not like I can take 2 weeks off from work and be 100%. Mine was really bad when I was going through it. It took me years. It took me years to really get back to where, now I'm at the point where I'm like working a full-time job and running a coaching business, and I'm doing all this stuff, and I feel amazing. And I have this, but I had to rebuild like the entire foundation of my life and like change how I approached the world, and that took time. And I think people don't realize, like, when you have to change some foundational stuff, like it's not like a quick fix. And the sooner you catch it, the quicker it'll be. But if you're deep in it, it's going to take a while to get back out,
Yeah, I actually have been seeing a really positive trend lately where I see a lot of people. I've coached people lately who are like, I know this isn't just going to be a 1-week vacation fix. And I'm like, yeah, good for you. So I'm starting to see a little bit more awareness about the burnout condition. But I think that's right on. And it's scary to approach that. I totally get why people don't want to really face that, but it's also dealing with whatever that underlying issue is that's caused you to be in this place. Working your way through that and coming out on the other side is one of the most meaningful things you will do as a human to grow in that way.
Yes, I completely agree. And I just want to say to anyone that's listening to this and feels really hopeless, like, there is a better life on the other side. There's so much left out there for you to do and enjoy about the world. And, there's a healing journey there. But once you start down that path, like, you're not going to regret making that change. So
I totally agree. I felt some pretty low lows in my career. I'm pretty like sunny, bubbly person now. And it's partly because I'm doing what I should be doing to give myself that energy, but it can feel like there is no way out. I totally agree. And there is such a better life ahead for you. Like, whoever's listening, you, the person who's listening, there is definitely a better way of living.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it doesn't matter what your goals are. If you want to stay in your career, if you want to completely change careers, there is that better life, and you can find joy. You can find happiness. And I think people don't realize how far they've sunk. Like, I have a friend right now who's texting me, and like, I'm waking up with panic attacks at 2 a.m. about work. And I'm just like, girl, like, you can't live like this. And it's been going on for a while, and it's just, people don't realize like how bad their life has gotten. And like, taking that moment to look in that mirror and actually acknowledge it, I think, is the hardest part.
I totally agree. And it's scary, and I get it. But if you find the right support system, people will be so proud of you for doing it.
Yeah.
We'll be proud of you. Even if you don't have a support system, we'll be proud of you.
Yes. Having support is so important. And just at least having one voice in your life that understands and that can, just acknowledge and support you and give you that accountability. Because I think people feel like, oh, I'm usually such a productive person. I usually am winning at life, and now I'm failing so badly. And it can be really hard to face that, I think.
Yeah, it's not just that like work identity false connection. It's also that like work ethic identity false connection. You are not your level of productivity. You as a human are worth so much more than the like widgets you make at work, the software you create, the people you check into your work, like whatever you do. You are worth so much more than that as a human. And that is one of the things I work on a lot with clients, because it is such a common misconception. But I do fully believe that people are worth so much more than their job.
Yeah. And I would say also, for the entrepreneurs listening, like, you are not your business. And this is something I've had to coach people on as well, as like, you need to have a separation. You need to have a boundary between you and your business, because if you equate yourself with your business and your identity and your self-worth, like, that can also lead to pretty deep burnout. And so, whether you're working in a 9-to-5 job or you're running your own business or you're doing both, you as a human are outside of that and you have value intrinsically just by existing. And it's funny because in the West, we have this productivity culture, but there's a lot of other cultures in the world that believe the opposite. They're like, your purpose on earth is just to be here, just like the trees and the rivers and the squirrels and the birds. Like they're not out there like, oh man, I need to be a better bird, like
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm kind of weird in this way. I have never believed in like a purpose of life. I'm just like, we're here. I want to do things that are important to me that I know other people will appreciate, but I don't need to find this like, it's probably the only like non-black and white thought I've ever had, but it's like, I don't need to find this one thing, be better, be great at this one thing, whatever. I've wanted those things in my life, but I've never felt like that was critical for me to be a successful human. Like you said, if you're human, you're inherently successful because you're here existing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So, okay, so you don't believe like in a purpose in life. So what is your thoughts around like spirit, energy, emotions, kind of where do you go with all of that stuff?
Yeah, I know. That was probably a big bombshell drop. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm typically very scientifically minded, honestly. I've never been super into spirituality or anything like that. I recently, in the past few years, have honestly been the most spiritual I've ever been. And to me, that means an intrinsic connection with other living things, people and nature. That's like my version of spirituality. I do believe in some way we're all connected. We all eat food from the same sun. That's like my version of spirituality. And I believe that I talk more in terms of like emotional energy, like kind of more along the lines of like what psychology believes. But I think it's really pretty similar to a lot of other spiritual beliefs if you really listen to like the core principles in it.
Yeah. I really love the people that tie science and medicine into the spirituality. Like Joe Dispenza is one of my favorite people who talks about like energy and manifestation because he's a medical doctor and he writes like these really detailed books where they're like, and then we hooked them up to the scan and they're like scanning people's brains while they're doing meditation. And so they're really doing all of this science around the spirituality because I'm similar. Like I have always been a very logical thinker coming from a tech background. And, I was never into all the woo-woo stuff. And then the woo-woo kind of like hit me across the head. And so I was like, well, I guess that's real. Like,
oh, totally. I totally get that. I think I have another controversial thought that you can
go
out
it.
Yeah, I think that sometimes with the woo-woo stuff, if you get nothing else out of it, you're doing something that is just for you. Like maybe like let's say you believe in tarot cards or whatever, you're doing it because you believe the spirit is like answering your questions. If you don't, you're doing it because you think it's fun and it's just for you. And I think especially neurodivergent people who are told what to do all day, I think especially women who are told what to do all day, I think that's such an important concept to do things that are just for you, even if they make no sense or if they make no sense to someone else.
I agree. And I think, everyone has their own journey and they will have their own experiences. And I don't think it necessarily matters what you believe as long as you're happy with what you believe and, that belief isn't actively harming others, right? So, and sometimes we have experiences that really shift that. And I think that's okay. Like, I didn't believe that trauma could be stored in your body. And then I do like a myofascial healing session and my chronic hip pain disappeared in 5 minutes. And I was like, well, I know it's real now.
Yeah, absolutely. Leaving space for it to change too is another like one of the most meaningful things you can go through as a human. To have yourself opened up to a new way of thinking is, I think it's very meaningful if you go through that.
Yeah. And I think, that's part of how we can access joy and happiness more often, I think, is by being a little more flexible, being a little more open to other perspectives. I just had this conversation with some ladies the other night and we were on a call and, some people were offended and none of it bothered me. And then, this whole after conversation about it. And I was like, it's fine. Like, that's your perspective. That's fine. You don't have to believe what I believe. And like, there's no right and wrong. Like, we get so stuck in like, this is right, this is
Yes.
wrong. This is the way I have to be. This is what I should do. This is what I should believe. And I think if you can start to just shift that to this is what I want or what I don't want, then you can access more of that happiness. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, I love that. I love that so much. So, specifically in OCD, one of the tenets of OCD is that people are typically searching for certainty, especially where there is none, because there's no certainty in life.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest transformations someone with OCD will go through will go from typically a very black and white, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. And that's how they sometimes get stuck in that obsessive compulsive cycle, will go to that place of, oh, there's no right and wrong. People made up all the rules that exist. They can be broken down and built back up at any time. And it's not quite as unstable as that, but I totally agree. And one of the things in my life that has created so much happiness and joy for me is creating as much space for the gray area as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot tell people enough how much happier I've become getting away from those black and white extremes. And that's just how I grew up and the influences or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a long time learning that even when you're really on one side of an argument or really on the other side, that there's so much gray area in the middle. And even today, the topics people typically talk about are so nuanced that these little sound bites don't even scratch the surface of what these topics are. And the more nuance you allow in your life, the more precision you allow in your language, that things are not right or wrong or bad or good. I do think that just directly leads to happiness because you're not confined by that system.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And, I think sometimes we get so stuck in our perspective and like the thinking of our community that we surround ourselves by, we forget like there's an entire world of people. And this is where travel has been really beneficial for me, just to see like, oh, how do these other people in this other part of the world think and how do they live and what's their values? And, it really can help you see that regardless of what you believe, you don't have to change what you believe, but you can start to see that there's a whole tapestry. It's not just one rope or one thread. It's like a whole beautiful tapestry of people out there, just living differently.
Absolutely. And sometimes you get to a point where you're like, oh, I don't think I'll ever be on that side. But there are so many opinions and ideas and thought processes out there that will fundamentally change the way you look at things, that it's so worth it to be open to it. One of the biggest turning points in my life was the first anthropology class I took in college, because I had been raised in this very religiously backed like mindset that was like right and wrong, good and bad. And then anthropology was like, well, these people do this and these do this. And I was like, you can do that? I had no idea. I didn't even know what a social construct was until I took that. So I can't, I totally agree. I think that's one of the best things about opening your mind and learning from new people is that it can change your total perspective for the better.
Yeah. I think education is pretty much always helpful. Like the more you can learn. And, I had a similar experience my first year of college. So I'm from West Virginia, and we have a little bit of an accent in West Virginia. And, I got in my speech 101 class and learned how that might impact my future. And that was something I actively changed. I was like, well, I don't want to be discriminated against based on how I talk. So I'm just going to shift how I say a few things. And that has probably made a huge difference in my career. But if I would have never gone to that class, like I wouldn't have even known, So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, there's always that debate about like, do I change myself or do I change the external? But yeah, it's like you should at least know. I'm a big believer in brains. That's why my company is called Thoughtful Thinkers, because I was like, I want to be like thoughtful, but I also want it to be about the brain, because the brain is the best computer we have access to. And I believe in the ability of every person's brain to process information in the most beneficial way for them. That's how our brains work. So if you give someone all the information, I do believe, and there's different levers to that. There's repetition and things like that. But
Sure.
if someone has the information, they're always better off for it.
Yeah, and I think people have this idea that they have to be a certain way, and I like to tell people like you can be whoever you want, you know? And it's not that you're trying to be, sometimes in this healing journey we get caught up in like, oh, the next good version or the better version, and I don't like that terminology. I like to say like the most authentic version, or like the version of yourself that you like the most, that you want to be, you know? Because we're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to be who we want.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that too. And even authenticity can be a little bit of a sticky word, because I had one friend who was where we both are into Enneagram, which I believe does not have any scientific basis, but we both anecdotally have found it to be very true. She's like, yeah, I'm a 4. I just care about authenticity. I just want to be myself. And I once asked her, what does authenticity mean to you? And her brain exploded and she couldn't talk to me for like at least a day. And she's like, I don't even know. What does it mean? So it's like, it's important. To your point, it's like important to be thoughtful about the word choice we use and the precision so that we know what we're talking about. But I agree. It's about being, where do you even, and people are not static in any way. Who do you want to be next? Who do you want to be now? Who do you want to be? And that's going to be different in a year, in 5 years. Yeah. Even what you want is going to be different in a year, in 5 years. I always, that interview question always annoyed me. Where do you want to be in 5 years? I don't know. Maybe let's see if I get this job first. I don't know.
Oh man, yes. Like for me, I've been moving so fast the past couple of years. I'm just like, where am I going to be in 3 months? I can't plan that right now. So.
I think it's very difficult to know, especially now. You know, things can change really quickly, and to think that I would almost be skeptical of someone who's like, I know I'm going to be here in 5 years. I'd be like, really? How do you know? I would turn on my coach. I don't know. How do you know that?
How do you know that? So what's next for you? Like maybe not in 5 years, but what are you working on next for yourself and for thoughtful thinkers?
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't set that question up well at all. Sorry. No, it's great. Thoughtful Thinkers is really going well. We are rolling out a new website really soon. We're making a bunch of great freebie guides. There's going to be a lot more content coming out in the future. So I would love if everybody could come over and follow me on Instagram, follow me on LinkedIn, check out the website, subscribe, all that stuff. I can, if it's okay if I say this now, I did make a freebie for anybody who's listening. If you want to message me on Instagram or LinkedIn with the word rebel, because I wanted to get into the spirit. Yeah, if you want to message me with the word rebel, I will give you my free guide to self-advocacy at work, which I think is important for anybody, entrepreneurs or employees or managers. It's all about like setting boundaries, figuring out what you need, things like that. My Instagram is Ashely K Thoughtful Coach. And then my LinkedIn is the same with the LinkedIn URL, LinkedIn/in, I think, /Ashely K Thoughtful Coach.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll have that linked in the show notes as well for people that want to follow and get that free advocacy guide. I love that. That would be so helpful for so many people. Cool. So new content, new guides on the website. What do you think is, the biggest takeaway? Like if you had to pick one thing you want listeners to take away from this and do or change going forward, like what's their takeaway today from you?
My big thing is that everyone deserves fulfilling, I'm probably going to say this 3 more times before this ends, fulfilling work that takes care of them financially comfortable and fulfilling work. Everyone deserves that. You may not, there are a million excuses of like, well, I have to do this before I get to this. And I understand sometimes you can't have everything perfect at all time, but you should always be striving for that. That's the only way that you can sustain a happy life, fulfilling work and financially comfortable.
Yeah, love that. Okay. And then one question I like to ask all my guests, who is your biggest inspiration?
Yeah, so my answer to this is so annoying. I'm a super Enneagram 1. So I really I've never had like idols. I try not to idolize people too much. I'm really inspired by ideals. I am so motivated by the idea of like equitable workspaces where people are happy and thriving. That's like what keeps me going every day. And I know that's so annoying. It's such a cop out, but I that is what drives me. That idea is my inspiration.
No, I love how you answered that because, and I think that just goes to show you don't have to accept, this is something I've been talking about lately, you don't have to accept the things that other people put in front of you, right? So you took that question and you changed it and you're like, well, actually, I want to answer it this way. And that's fine, right? And we should all do that a little bit more in our lives and not just, accept what's right in front of us, but strive for more and maybe say, that doesn't quite fit. How can I change it to fit? So I love that answer.
Okay, good.
All right. So thank you so much, Ashely, for coming on the show today. Again, we'll link your Instagram website in the show notes, and you guys go and give her a follow. Comment Rebel to get that free guide. I'm so excited for that. Any last words for our listeners?
Thank you so much for having me on. Anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, you're doing an amazing job because you're thinking about how you can make your life better. So anybody who's listening, you're already at that baseline where you're being thoughtful about your life. You're trying to do things better. And if you're maybe giving yourself a hard time because you're burnt out, or you think you're burnt out, or you think you're not burnt out and you're just not doing as well as other people, the fact that you're listening to this means you are trying, and maybe you just need to change something about your situation. But we've been so supportive. I'm going to be cheesy and say, like, I believe in you. If you're listening to this, then you're on your way. And I wish you every success.
Well, thank you so much for that message of hope. And yeah, I would just second that, anytime we're moving towards our goals, that's great. So, all right. Thanks so much, Ashely. And hopefully we'll chat again soon.